The Steroid Era, the untold story of baseball's darkest chapter. Chapter 1. The Magic Summer, 1998 to 1999. The crack of the bat echoed through Busch Stadium like thunder on a clear night. Mark McGwire had just launched number 62 into the St. Louis sky, breaking Babe Ruth's sacred record that had stood for 39 years. The crowd erupted in a roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of baseball itself. 300 miles away in a cramped apartment in East Los Angeles, 22-year-old Tommy Rodriguez jumped off his second-hand couch, spilling beer across his coffee table. "Did you see that?" he shouted to his empty living room, watching the replay on his fuzzy television screen. McGwire rounded the bases like a conquering hero, his massive frame moving with surprising grace. Tommy had been following the home run chase all summer, living and breathing every swing alongside millions of other Americans who had fallen back in love with baseball. Tommy was grinding through his third season in Double-A ball, hitting a respectable but unspectacular 25 home runs a year. He had power, sure, but nothing like what he was watching on television. McGwire's home runs didn't just clear the fence, they demolished it, traveling distances that seemed to defy the laws of physics. In Chicago, Sammy Sosa was matching him swing for swing, his infectious smile and enthusiastic celebrations making him a media darling. Someday, Tommy whispered to himself, the same prayer he'd been saying since he was 8 years old, playing in the dusty lots of his neighborhood. Someday that'll be me. Meanwhile, in the press box at Candlestick Park in San Francisco, 26-year-old Sarah Chen was typing furiously on her laptop, trying to capture the electricity in the air as the Giants hosted the Cubs. Sosa had just hit his 58th home run of the season, and the visiting fans were going wild. Sarah had been covering baseball for the San Francisco Chronicle for 2 years, but she had never experienced anything like this summer. "This is what baseball is supposed to feel like," she told her editor over the phone later that night. "Kids are collecting cards again. Families are coming to games together. The strike is finally behind us." The 1994 players' strike had nearly killed baseball. Fans felt betrayed when the World Series was canceled, and many had sworn off the game forever. But now, 4 years later, the magic was back. Home runs were flying out of ballparks at record rates. Players looked bigger and stronger than ever before. The game seemed to be evolving into something more spectacular than anyone had imagined. Down in the bowels of Candlestick Park, 60-year-old Jim Morrison was cleaning up the visiting clubhouse after the Cubs had left for their hotel. Big Jim, as everyone called him, had been working in major league clubhouses for 32 years. He had seen players come and go, witnessed the integration of baseball, watched salaries explode from thousands to millions. But something about this current era felt different. The players were bigger now, that was obvious. Not just taller or naturally muscular, but thick in ways that seemed almost cartoonish. Their necks were like tree trunks, their forearms like ham hocks. Jim remembered when players looked like regular people who happened to be exceptionally gifted athletes. Now they looked like comic book superheroes. He also noticed other changes. Players who had been journeymen for years were suddenly hitting 30 home runs. Guys in their late 30s who should have been declining were having career years. Recovery times from injuries seemed shorter. Players who used to be exhausted by August were finishing the season stronger than they started. But Jim kept his observations to himself. He was just the clubhouse guy after all. His job was to keep things clean and organized, not to question why players were performing better than ever. Besides, everyone was happy. Fans were coming back to the ballparks, television ratings were soaring, and baseball was America's pastime again. As 1998 turned into 1999, the home run explosion continued. Players were hitting balls farther and more frequently than at any time in the sport's history. The media celebrated this new era of offense, calling it a renaissance of power hitting. Fans packed stadiums to witness history in the making. Tommy finally got his call-up to AAA that spring one step away from the major leagues. He worked harder than ever, spending extra hours in the batting cage, trying to add the kind of power that would get him noticed. But no matter how much he trained, he couldn't match what he was seeing on television every night. Sarah continued covering the feel-good stories, writing about packed stadiums and record-breaking performances. Her editors loved the positive coverage, and readers couldn't get enough of the home run heroes. Baseball was back, and everyone wanted to celebrate. Big Jim kept working, kept watching, and kept wondering. But the questions in his mind remained unspoken, buried beneath the joy and excitement of baseball's magical return. Chapter 2: The Temptation, 2000 to 2001. Tommy's hands were shaking as he signed his first major league contract in March 2000. The San Francisco Giants had called him up from AAA after a solid spring training, and he was finally living his childhood dream. But as he walked into the Giants clubhouse for the first time as a big leaguer, the reality of the situation hit him like a fastball to the chest. These weren't just big men, they were giants among giants. Players he had watched on television looked even more imposing in person. Their arms bulged against their uniform sleeves, their shoulders stretched the fabric to its limits. Tommy, at 6 feet tall and 200 pounds, felt like a child among adults. "Don't worry, rookie," said veteran first baseman Mike "Tank" Patterson, slapping Tommy on the back with a hand that felt like a catcher's mitt. "You'll figure it out. We all do." Tommy's first month in the majors was humbling. He managed only 2 home runs while striking out 37 times. The pitchers were faster than anything he had faced in the minors, and his bat felt like a toothpick in his hands. Meanwhile, his teammates were launching balls into the San Francisco Bay with frightening regularity. After a particularly bad game in May, Patterson approached Tommy in the tunnel leading to the parking garage. "Kid, you got talent, but talent ain't enough up here anymore. You want to stick around, you need to maximize your potential." "What do you mean?" Tommy asked, though something in Patterson's tone made his stomach tighten. "There's a guy I know, trainer named Rodriguez, no relation, I'm guessing. He works with a lot of guys in the league, helps them reach their peak performance. You interested?" Tommy knew he should ask more questions, but the fear of being sent back to the minors was overwhelming. "Yeah," he heard himself say. "Yeah, I'm interested." 2 weeks later, Tommy found himself in a nondescript office building in downtown San Francisco, sitting across from a man who introduced himself only as Doc. The office had no medical diplomas on the walls, no certificates or credentials visible anywhere. "Your friend Patterson tells me you want to compete at the highest level," Doc said, his accent thick and unplaceable. "I can help you do that. But you have to understand, what we discuss here stays here." Doc explained that he provided nutritional supplements that would help Tommy's body recover faster, build muscle more efficiently, and perform at levels he never thought possible. The supplements were expensive, $5,000 a month, but the results would be worth it. "Is this legal?" Tommy asked, the question burning in his throat. Doc smiled. "Everything I provide is not specifically banned by Major League Baseball. The league doesn't test for these substances. Many of your teammates and competitors are already using similar programs." Tommy thought about his family back in Los Angeles, about his father who worked double shifts at the factory to support Tommy's baseball dreams, about his mother who had never missed a game from Little League through high school. He thought about the apartment he was renting month to month, never knowing if he'd be sent down to the minors. "Okay," he said, "let's do it." Meanwhile, Sarah Chen was beginning to notice patterns that troubled her journalistic instincts. She had been assigned to write a feature story about the incredible offensive numbers being posted across Major League Baseball, but the more she researched, the more questions arose. Home run totals had increased by 40% over the past 5 years. Players were hitting balls farther than ever recorded in the sport's history. Most remarkably, players in their mid to late 30s were having career years at ages when they should have been declining. Sarah started keeping a spreadsheet, tracking players' physical changes over time. She collected photographs from baseball cards and media guides, comparing how players looked from year to year. The transformations were dramatic. Players who had been lean and wiry were suddenly thick and muscular. Faces that had been narrow were now wide and square-jawed. When she pitched a story about these statistical anomalies to her editor, Mike Kowalski, he was less than enthusiastic. "Sarah, baseball is finally healthy again," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Fans are coming back, ratings are up, the game is exciting. Why would we want to rain on that parade?" "Because something doesn't add up," Sarah insisted. "These numbers are historically unprecedented. Don't you think we should investigate why? Maybe players are just training better. Maybe nutrition science has improved. Maybe the game is evolving. Look, I need you to focus on positive stories. Write about the excitement, the records being broken, the fans coming back to the ballparks." But Sarah couldn't let it go. She started making calls to former players, trainers, and team personnel, asking careful questions about the changes in the game. Most people were reluctant to talk, but slowly she began to piece together a picture that disturbed her. Big Jim Morrison was sweeping the Giants' clubhouse after a home game when Sarah approached him. She had been trying to get interviews with current players and coaches, but everyone gave her the same sanitized answers about improved training methods and better nutrition. "Mr. Morrison," she said, "you've been around the game longer than almost anyone. What do you think about the changes in baseball over the past few years?" Jim stopped sweeping and looked at her carefully. He had noticed her around the clubhouse, asking questions, taking notes. She seemed different from the other reporters, more serious, less interested in easy stories. "What kind of changes are you talking about?" he asked. "The physical changes in players, the dramatic increase in power numbers, the way guys are performing at ages when they used to be declining." Jim was quiet for a long moment. He had been having the same thoughts for months, but he had never voiced them to anyone. His job depended on discretion, on keeping clubhouse secrets. But something about Sarah's earnest concern made him want to talk. "I've been in this game for 32 years, he said finally. "I've seen a lot of changes. Some good, some not so good. But I'll tell you this. What I'm seeing now, it ain't natural." "What do you mean?" Jim looked around to make sure they were alone. "Players today, they're different. Not just bigger, but different. They recover from workouts faster than should be possible. They maintain their strength throughout the season when they used to fade in August. And the way some of them look..." He shook his head. "I've seen bodybuilders who don't look as enhanced as some of these baseball players." "Enhanced?" Sarah asked, her pulse quickening. "I'm not saying anything specific," Jim said quickly. "I'm just saying that in 32 years, I've never seen changes like this happen naturally." As Sarah left the stadium that night, she knew she was onto something significant. The question was whether she would be allowed to pursue it, and whether anyone would listen if she did. Tommy's transformation began almost immediately. Within 6 weeks of starting Doc's program, he had gained 15 pounds of muscle. His home run distance increased dramatically, and balls that used to die at the warning track were now sailing into the seats. His recovery time between workouts was cut in half, and he felt stronger at the end of games than he did at the beginning. The results were intoxicating. Tommy hit 12 home runs in June, more than he had hit in any full season in the minors. Fans started chanting his name, and his jersey began appearing in the stands. For the first time in his life, he felt like a true major league player. But the changes weren't just physical. Tommy found himself more aggressive, quicker to anger, prone to mood swings that confused and frightened him. His relationship with his girlfriend became strained as his personality shifted. Sleep became elusive, and he often found himself wired with nervous energy late into the night. The worst part was the isolation. He couldn't talk to his family about what he was doing. He couldn't confide in friends from his minor league days. The secret ate at him, but the results were undeniable. He was finally competing at the level he had always dreamed of. As the 2000 season ended, Tommy had hit 28 home runs and driven in 85 runs. He was named the National League Rookie of the Year runner-up, and his future in the major leagues seemed secure. But late at night, alone in his apartment, Tommy sometimes wondered what he had become. The face looking back at him in the mirror was his own, but different, thicker, more angular, harder. He was living his dream. But the dream had changed him in ways he was only beginning to understand. The game of baseball was changing too, though few people were willing to acknowledge it publicly. The summer of shadows was deepening, and the consequences would soon become impossible to ignore. Chapter 3. The Web of Secrets, 2002 to 2003. By 2002, Tommy Rodriguez had become one of the most feared hitters in the National League. His transformation was complete. 230 pounds of muscle packed onto his 6-foot frame, capable of hitting baseballs distances that defied belief. He had just signed a 4-year, $48 million contract extension with the Giants, and his face graced magazine covers across the country. But success had come with a price that extended far beyond the monthly payments to Doc. Tommy's relationship with his family had become strained and artificial. When he visited home in Los Angeles, his mother would stare at him with a mixture of pride and confusion, as if she couldn't quite recognize the son she had raised. "Mijo, you look so different," she said during his visit that Christmas, reaching up to touch his face. "Your jaw, it's so wide now. And your hands, they're so big." Tommy pulled away, forcing a smile. "It's just the training, Mama. Professional athletes have to maintain their bodies differently." His father was more direct. "You sure you're not taking anything you shouldn't be taking?" he asked one evening as they sat on the back porch. "Because some of the guys at the factory, they're saying things about baseball players these days." "What kind of things?" Tommy asked, though he dreaded the answer. "That they're using drugs, steroids, making themselves bigger and stronger artificially." His father's eyes searched Tommy's face. "You wouldn't do something like that, would you?" The lie came easily now, after years of practice. "Of course not, Papa. I'm just working harder than ever. The game has evolved. Players are more dedicated to fitness and nutrition than they used to be." But the web of deception was expanding beyond individual players. Tommy had learned that Doc's operation was much larger than he had initially understood. The trainer worked with dozens of major league players, providing a sophisticated network of substances that were constantly evolving to stay ahead of any potential testing. During the 2002 season, Tommy was introduced to other players in Doc's program during a meeting at an upscale hotel in Chicago. The gathering felt like a secret society. 15 of the game's biggest stars sitting in a conference room discussing their enhancement protocols like businessmen reviewing quarterly reports. "The key is cycling," explained veteran slugger Marcus Williams, who had hit 57 home runs the previous season. "You go on for 8 weeks, off for 4, then back on with a different combination. Keeps your body from adapting and makes detection nearly impossible." "What about the new testing rumors?" asked a young pitcher who had suddenly developed a 100-mile-per-hour fastball. Doc, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke. "Major League Baseball has no interest in comprehensive testing. It would destroy too many careers, taint too many records. The game is more popular than it's been in decades. Why would they want to change that?" Tommy left that meeting feeling both reassured and deeply troubled. He was part of something much bigger than his individual choices, but that also meant he was trapped in a system that seemed impossible to escape. Sarah Chen's investigation had been progressing slowly but steadily. After her conversation with Big Jim Morrison, she had begun developing a network of sources throughout baseball. Former players, trainers, team employees, and medical professionals who were willing to speak off the record about what they were witnessing. The picture that emerged was disturbing. Multiple sources confirmed that performance-enhancing drug use was widespread throughout Major League Baseball. Players were using sophisticated combinations of steroids, human growth hormone, and other substances under the guidance of trainers who operated in a legal gray area. "It's not just a few bad apples," explained Dr. Jennifer Martinez, a sports medicine physician who had worked with several major league teams before becoming disgusted with what she witnessed. "It's systematic. Players feel they have no choice but to participate if they want to compete." Sarah had compiled a database of statistical anomalies, physical transformations, and testimonial evidence that painted a comprehensive picture of widespread enhancement. But every time she tried to move forward with the story, she encountered resistance. "Sarah, you're chasing ghosts," her editor Mike Kowalski told her during a heated meeting in early 2003. "You have a lot of speculation and anonymous sources, but no concrete proof, no failed drug tests, no smoking gun. Meanwhile, you're ignoring the biggest story in sports, the greatest offensive era in baseball history." "That's exactly the story," Sarah insisted. "This offensive explosion isn't natural, it's chemically enhanced, and fans deserve to know the truth. The truth is that baseball is thriving, attendance is at record levels, television ratings are through the roof, and players are performing at levels that inspire millions of kids to play the game. Why would we want to tear that down based on rumors and speculation?" The pressure to drop the investigation was coming from multiple directions. Team officials stopped returning her calls. Players who had previously been accessible became suddenly unavailable. Even some of her sources began backing away, afraid of the consequences of speaking out. But Sarah found an unexpected ally in Big Jim Morrison, who had become increasingly troubled by what he witnessed in the clubhouse. Jim had seen players transform not just physically, but emotionally and psychologically. The enhancement culture was changing personalities, destroying relationships, and creating an atmosphere of secrecy and paranoia. "It's not just about the drugs," Jim told Sarah during one of their clandestine meetings in a coffee shop far from the ballpark. "It's about what the drugs are doing to these men as human beings. I've seen players become aggressive, paranoid, unable to relate to their families. I've seen marriages destroyed, friendships ruined." "Would you be willing to go on the record?" Sarah asked. Jim was quiet for a long time. "If I do that, my career is over. I'm 63 years old. This job is all I know." "But if you don't, this continues. More players get caught up in it, more records get tainted, more fans get deceived." "Let me think about it," Jim said. "But keep digging. The truth needs to come out, one way or another." Tommy's world began to unravel during the 2003 season. The physical side effects of his enhancement program were becoming harder to ignore. He developed severe acne across his back and shoulders, his hairline began receding rapidly, and he experienced mood swings that terrified him. The breaking point came during a series against the Dodgers in August. After striking out in a crucial situation, Tommy exploded in the dugout, screaming at teammates and throwing equipment. The outburst was so violent that manager Fa Li Pea Lo had to physically restrain him. "What's wrong with you?" Alu demanded after the game. "That's not who you are." But Tommy wasn't sure who he was anymore. The enhancement program had given him everything he thought he wanted: fame, money, success. But it had also taken away the person he used to be. He was trapped in a body and a life that no longer felt like his own. That night, Tommy called his father for the first time in months. "Papa," he said, his voice breaking. "I think I made a mistake. A big mistake." "What kind of mistake, me-ho?" Tommy wanted to tell him everything, about Doc, about the drugs, about the web of deception that had consumed his life. But the words wouldn't come. Too much was at stake, too many people were involved. The secret had become bigger than any individual player. I don't know who I am anymore," Tommy said finally. "You're my son," his father replied. "Whatever's wrong, we can fix it. But you have to be honest with me." Tommy hung up the phone, knowing that honesty might cost him everything he had worked for. But he was beginning to realize that dishonesty had already cost him something far more valuable: his soul. As the 2003 season ended, the web of secrets that had sustained baseball's enhancement culture was beginning to show cracks. Sarah's investigation was gaining momentum, despite institutional resistance. Big Jim was wrestling with his conscience, knowing that his silence made him complicit in the deception. And players like Tommy were discovering that the price of artificial greatness was higher than they had ever imagined. The reckoning was coming, and when it arrived, it would shake the foundations of America's pastime. Chapter 4, The Reckoning, 2004 to 2005. The first crack in the wall of silence came from an unexpected source. In February 2004, federal agents raided the Bay Area laboratory cooperative known as Bailco in Burlingame, California. The raid was part of an investigation into the distribution of illegal performance-enhancing drugs to professional athletes, and it sent shockwaves through the sports world. Tommy Rodriguez watched the news coverage from his apartment in San Francisco, his hands trembling as he held his morning coffee. Bailco wasn't Doc's operation, but Tommy knew that many of his teammates had connections to the lab. The investigation was getting closer to the heart of baseball's enhancement culture, and Tommy felt the walls closing in around him. Within days of the raid, subpoenas began flying. Players were called to testify before federal grand juries. The names of some of baseball's biggest stars began appearing in connection with the investigation. The sport that had been celebrating its renaissance suddenly found itself under intense scrutiny. Sarah Chen had been tracking the Bailco story from its earliest stages, and she recognized it as the breakthrough her investigation needed. The federal probe was providing the concrete evidence that had been missing from her reporting. Documents, financial records, and testimony that proved what many had suspected for years. "This is it," she told her editor, Mike Kowalski, as they watched the news coverage together. "This is the smoking gun we've been waiting for." But even with federal investigators involved, Kowalski remained reluctant to pursue the story aggressively. "Let's see how this plays out," he said. "We don't want to get ahead of the facts." Sarah realized that if she was going to break this story, she would need to do it without her newspaper's full support. She began working on her investigation during her own time, using vacation days to conduct interviews and follow leads. Her breakthrough came when Big Jim Morrison finally agreed to go on the record. The veteran clubhouse attendant had been wrestling with his conscience for months, watching as more players got caught up in the enhancement culture, while the institutions that were supposed to protect the game remained silent. "I can't stay quiet anymore," Jim told Sarah during a meeting at his modest home in Oakland. "I've seen too much, and I know too much. These players, they're not bad people. They're caught up in a system that's bigger than any individual, but someone has to speak up." Jim's testimony was devastating. He provided detailed accounts of what he had witnessed in clubhouses across the league, players injecting themselves with unknown substances, trainers providing enhancement protocols, team officials who knew what was happening but chose to look the other way. "It wasn't just a few players," Jim explained. "It was systematic. Players felt they had no choice but to participate if they wanted to compete. The clean players were at a disadvantage, and everyone knew it." Armed with Jim's testimony and the evidence emerging from the Bailco investigation, Sarah finally had the story she had been pursuing for years. But she also knew that publishing it would have consequences that extended far beyond her own career. Tommy's crisis came to a head during spring training in 2004. The Bailco investigation had created an atmosphere of paranoia throughout baseball, and players were beginning to turn on each other. Rumors flew about who was cooperating with federal investigators and who might be named in future indictments. The stress was eating Tommy alive. He had stopped sleeping regularly. His performance on the field was suffering, and his relationships with teammates had become strained and suspicious. The enhancement program that had once made him feel invincible now felt like a prison. During a team meeting in March, Giants general manager Brian Sabian addressed the Bailco situation directly. I want everyone to know that this organization has zero tolerance for performance-enhancing drug use, he announced. Anyone who has been involved in illegal enhancement needs to come forward now, before this gets worse. Tommy felt every eye in the room on him, though he knew that was probably his paranoia talking. Several of his teammates were likely in the same situation, but the culture of secrecy made it impossible to know who could be trusted. After the meeting, Tommy called Doc for the first time in weeks. "I want out," he said without preamble. "That's not how this works," Doc replied, his voice cold. "You're in the middle of a contract year. Your numbers drop off, people are going to ask questions. You want to explain to federal investigators why your performance suddenly declined?" Tommy realized he was trapped. Continuing the enhancement program was dangerous, but stopping it might be even more dangerous. Either choice could destroy his career and potentially land him in prison. The breaking point came in June, when Tommy's name appeared in a leaked document from the Bailco investigation. The document didn't prove anything definitively, but it suggested that Tommy had been in contact with individuals connected to the enhancement network. That night, Tommy's phone rang constantly. Reporters, agents, team officials, all wanting to know his side of the story. He turned off his phone and sat in his apartment, staring at the walls, trying to figure out how his dream had become such a nightmare. Sarah's story was finally published in August 2004 under the headline "The Shadow Game: How Performance-Enhancing Drugs Changed Baseball." The investigation was comprehensive and damning, providing evidence of widespread enhancement use throughout Major League Baseball. The reaction was immediate and intense. Players' union representatives denounced the story as a witch hunt. Team officials claimed they were shocked by the allegations. Commissioner Bud Selig announced that baseball would take these allegations seriously and investigate thoroughly. But Sarah knew that the real impact would come from how fans reacted. Baseball's renaissance had been built on the excitement of record-breaking performances and superhuman feats. If fans learned that those achievements were chemically enhanced, would they still care about the game? The answer came quickly. Attendance began dropping at ballparks across the country. Television ratings declined. Merchandise sales fell. The magic that had returned to baseball after the 1994 strike was evaporating as quickly as it had appeared. Tommy found himself at the center of the storm when he was called to testify before a congressional committee investigating performance-enhancing drug use in sports. The hearing, held in March 2005, was broadcast live on national television and watched by millions of Americans. Sitting at the witness table, facing a panel of senators and a room full of cameras, Tommy felt the weight of his choices crushing down on him. He had two options: lie under oath and risk perjury charges, or tell the truth and destroy his career. "Mr. Rodriguez," asked Senator John McCain, "have you ever used performance-enhancing drugs during your baseball career?" Tommy looked out at the gallery, where he could see his parents sitting in the front row. His mother's eyes were filled with tears, and his father's face was a mask of disappointment and concern. "Senator," Tommy said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I invoke my Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination." The room erupted in chaos. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and Tommy felt his world collapsing around him. By refusing to answer, he had essentially confirmed what everyone suspected. His career was over, his reputation was destroyed, and his family was devastated. But in that moment of complete destruction, Tommy also felt something he hadn't experienced in years: relief. The secret that had been eating him alive was finally out in the open. The lies that had defined his life for the past 5 years were no longer necessary. As the hearing concluded, and Tommy was escorted from the building by security, he knew that his life would never be the same. But for the first time since he had walked into Doc's office, he felt like himself again. The reckoning had come for baseball's steroid era, and the game would never be the same. Records were tainted, heroes were fallen, and fans felt betrayed. But from the ashes of that destruction, there was hope that the game could rebuild itself on a foundation of honesty and integrity. The summer of shadows was finally ending, but the long process of healing was just beginning. Chapter 5: The Long Shadow, 2005 and Beyond. The congressional hearings of March 2005 marked the end of baseball's steroid era, but the aftermath would linger for decades. Tommy Rodriguez returned to his apartment in San Francisco to find reporters camped outside his building and his phone ringing with interview requests from around the world. He had become the face of baseball's enhancement scandal, a symbol of both the corruption and the human cost of the pursuit of artificial greatness. Within a week of his congressional testimony, the Giants released Tommy from his contract. No other major league team would sign him. At 27 years old, with what should have been the best years of his career ahead of him, Tommy Rodriguez was effectively banned from professional baseball. The physical withdrawal from the enhancement program was brutal. Without the artificial support of steroids and growth hormones, Tommy's body began to break down. He lost 30 pounds in 2 months, his strength evaporated, and he experienced depression so severe that he barely left his apartment for weeks at a time. "I don't know who I am without the drugs," he confided to Sarah Chen during one of their interviews. Sarah had been following Tommy's story as part of her ongoing coverage of the steroid era's aftermath. "For 5 years, I was this superhuman version of myself. Now I feel like I'm disappearing." Tommy's family rallied around him during this dark period. His parents flew to San Francisco and essentially moved into his apartment, providing the support system he desperately needed. His father, who had worked double shifts for years to support Tommy's baseball dreams, now worked to help his son rebuild his life from scratch. "The money doesn't matter," his father told him one evening as they sat on Tommy's balcony, looking out at the San Francisco Bay. "The fame doesn't matter. What matters is that you're still my son, and you're still alive. We'll figure out the rest." Tommy began attending counseling sessions with Dr. Patricia Williams, a psychologist who specialized in helping athletes transition away from performance-enhancing drugs. The sessions were painful, forcing Tommy to confront not just his drug use, but the underlying insecurities and pressures that had led him to make those choices. "You weren't just addicted to the drugs," Dr. Williams explained. "You were addicted to the version of yourself that the drugs created. Learning to accept your natural abilities and limitations is going to be the hardest thing you've ever done." Slowly, Tommy began to rebuild his identity. He started working out again, but this time focusing on health rather than performance. He began eating properly, sleeping regularly, and reconnecting with the parts of himself that had existed before the enhancement program. In 2006, Tommy made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He began speaking at high schools and colleges about the dangers of performance-enhancing drugs. His message was simple but powerful. The pursuit of artificial greatness would ultimately destroy everything that made achievement meaningful. "I thought the drugs would make me into the player I always wanted to be," he told a group of high school athletes in Los Angeles. "But they actually took away the player I really was. They stole my natural abilities, my relationships, and my integrity. Don't make the same mistake I did." Sarah Chen's career had taken off following her groundbreaking investigation of baseball's steroid era. She won a Pulitzer Prize for her reporting and became one of the most respected sports journalists in the country. But the success came with a cost that she hadn't anticipated. Many of her sources within baseball stopped talking to her. Team officials viewed her as a threat, and players were wary of being interviewed by the reporter who had helped expose the sport's biggest scandal. Sarah found herself increasingly isolated from the game she had loved since childhood. "I did the right thing," she told her mentor, veteran journalist Bob Ryan, during a conversation in 2006. "But sometimes I wonder if it was worth it. Baseball was magical for a few years, and I helped destroy that magic." "The magic was fake," Ryan replied. What you did was restore the possibility of real magic. It might take time, but eventually the game will be better because of your work. Sarah continued covering baseball, but her focus shifted to the sport's efforts to clean itself up. She wrote extensively about the new drug testing protocols that Major League Baseball implemented in response to the scandal. She covered the stories of clean players who had been overshadowed during the steroid era and were finally getting the recognition they deserved. In 2007, Sarah published a book about her investigation titled The Shadow Game: Inside Baseball's Steroid Era. The book became a bestseller and was later adapted into a documentary film. But Sarah donated most of her profits to organizations that promoted drug-free athletics, feeling that she shouldn't profit from the destruction of so many careers. Big Jim Morrison retired from his job with the Giants in 2005, shortly after testifying before Congress about what he had witnessed during the steroid era. His decision to speak out had cost him friendships within the baseball community, but he never regretted his choice. "I saw what that culture did to players like Tommy Rodriguez," Jim explained during his retirement ceremony, which was attended by only a handful of people. "These weren't bad kids. They were good kids who got caught up in a bad system. Someone had to speak up for them." Jim spent his retirement years working with Little League organizations, teaching young players about the fundamentals of baseball and the importance of playing the game the right way. He became a beloved figure in youth baseball, known for his stories about the old days and his gentle wisdom about what really mattered in sports. "Baseball is a beautiful game when it's played honestly," he would tell the kids. "You don't need to be the biggest or the strongest to be great. You just need to respect the game and respect yourself." The institutional changes in baseball were slow but significant. Major League Baseball implemented comprehensive drug testing in 2005, with severe penalties for violations. The Players' Union, which had previously resisted testing, finally agreed to cooperate in cleaning up the sport. Commissioner Bud Selig, who had been criticized for allowing the steroid era to flourish, became one of the most aggressive advocates for drug-free baseball. Under his leadership, the sport invested millions of dollars in testing technology and education programs. "We failed our fans during the steroid era," Selig admitted during a press conference in 2006. "We allowed the pursuit of entertainment value to override our responsibility to maintain the integrity of the game. That will never happen again." The Hall of Fame became a battleground over how to handle players from the steroid era. Voters struggled with whether to induct players whose achievements might have been chemically enhanced. Some of the greatest statistical performers in baseball history found themselves excluded from Cooperstown, their legacies forever tainted by suspicion. The fans' relationship with baseball was fundamentally changed by the steroid scandal. Attendance and television ratings, which had soared during the enhancement era, declined significantly in the years following the congressional hearings. Many fans felt betrayed by the players they had idolized and the institutions they had trusted. But gradually, a new generation of fans began to embrace the post-steroid game. These fans appreciated the authenticity of drug-tested baseball, even if the home run totals were lower and the performances less spectacular. They valued integrity over entertainment, substance over spectacle. By 2010, Tommy Rodriguez had found a new purpose in life. He was working as a counselor at a drug rehabilitation center in Los Angeles, helping people overcome various forms of addiction. His experience with performance-enhancing drugs had given him unique insights into the psychology of substance abuse and the challenges of recovery. "Every addiction is different, but they all have one thing in common," Tommy explained to his clients. "They promise to make you into someone better than who you really are. But the truth is, who you really are is already enough." Tommy never returned to professional baseball, but he found peace with that decision. He married his longtime girlfriend, Maria, in 2008, and they had 2 children together. He coached his son's Little League team, teaching the fundamentals of the game and the importance of playing it honestly. "I tell the kids that baseball is about more than winning," Tommy said. It's about testing yourself against the best competition, pushing your natural abilities to their limits, and accepting the results with dignity. That's what I should have remembered when I was playing. Sarah Chen continued her journalism career, but she never forgot the lessons of the steroid era. She became an advocate for investigative sports journalism, encouraging young reporters to ask difficult questions and hold powerful institutions accountable. Sports journalism isn't just about entertainment, she told journalism students during a lecture at Stanford University in 2012. It's about truth. Athletes are role models for millions of kids, and sports organizations have enormous influence on our culture. We have a responsibility to make sure that influence is used positively. Big Jim Morrison passed away peacefully in 2015, surrounded by family and friends from the baseball community. His funeral was attended by hundreds of people, including many of the young players he had mentored during his retirement years. Tommy Rodriguez spoke at Jim's funeral, remembering the man who had helped expose the truth about baseball's steroid era. Jim Morrison saved baseball, Tommy said, not by protecting its secrets, but by having the courage to reveal them. He understood that the game was bigger than any individual player or any single era. He knew that baseball would survive the truth, but it might not survive the lies. The steroid era left permanent scars on baseball, but it also taught valuable lessons about integrity, accountability, and the true meaning of athletic achievement. The records from that era remain in the books, marked forever by asterisks and suspicion. But the game itself survived, perhaps stronger for having confronted its demons. As Tommy Rodriguez often told the young athletes he counseled, the hardest thing about making a mistake isn't living with the consequences, it's learning from those consequences and making sure you never make the same mistake again. Baseball learned that lesson the hard way, but it learned it well. The summer of shadows had ended, and while the game would never be quite the same, it had rediscovered something that had been lost during the enhancement era: its soul. The long shadow of the steroid era would continue to influence baseball for generations to come, serving as a reminder that the pursuit of greatness must never come at the expense of integrity. In the end, that might be the most valuable lesson of all.